to use the COVID-19 remote learning resource to think about peer-to-peer discussion. So welcome everyone. Again, if you have any kind of technical issue that comes up, please chat NVPS and John Salazar will help you out with anything that does come up. So this webinar is part of a series. It was rescheduled from earlier in the month, but is a three-part webinar. May 1st and May 15th are archived on the webpage if you are interested in learning more about Google Classroom or formative assessment and feedback. And today, the final one in this series is focusing on peer-to-peer discussion. All of these have been using the same learning module. Where did COVID-19 come from? So for today's agenda, we're going to open up in a few minutes and just talk a little bit about why is peer-to-peer discussion important, especially in a remote context. Then I'm going to very briefly go over the COVID-19 learning plan. So I think at this point, I've seen some of you before in webinars, and so you're aware of the plan. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking through the plan. You're always welcome to go later and look back at that plan to get more information. We're going to experience as learners 2 different ways in which you can engage your students in peer-to-peer discussion using this plan. And then of course we'll have a debrief and discussion and have a little bit of time at the end and for questions and answers if there's any extra help is needed and feedback. So as I mentioned, our goal today, our main goal is really focusing in on peer discussion in a remote environment. We're also going to model basically three different ways in which you can do that. One is collaborating in Google Slides. We're going to practice with Flipgrid. And we're also going to experience a refine, relate, micro routine in just a moment, another way to engage your students in peer-to-peer discussion. And we're of course going to help you guys become aware of other ways that we can support you in upcoming webinars and resources. So our norms and agreements, I think everyone is used to using Zoom and other video formats by now. We know that it's best to keep our microphone muted when we're not talking, just to minimize background noise. And then today also, we're going to have several different resources that you're going to need to open and use. So I'd suggest taking a second now and closing any extra tabs or windows that you have on your computer, just so it'll be faster for you to find the resources that you need. And then this is more of a reminder for me that I need to just slow down and give people extra wait time, since it does take us a minute to find resources, to unmute ourselves, and or to type. So just being patient with everyone. So John, if you could go ahead and send the agenda in the chat, that would be helpful. So that people have all the resources for today available in that agenda.
It's already there, actually. Just if you scroll up about 4 messages ago, it should be right there.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder too, in terms of norms and agreements, as everyone recognizing the complexity and the emotional difficulty that our students in particular and ourselves are going through in this time, and just using that as a lens throughout the entire webinar, and thinking about our resources and forefronting flexibility and concern for our students and ourselves during this time. And a reminder that all the resources, the slides, the recording will all be available to you after the session. I'll send you an email with everything, and everything also is available on the website. So let's get into this. So why does peer-to-peer discussion matter, especially right now? And to talk about that, we're going to use a micro routine. These are small instructional routines or peer-to-peer discussion routines that have been modified for the remote environment. And this one has 3 steps, 3 very short steps. And this is just the overview of it. We're going to actually experience this in just a moment. So for about 30 seconds, I'm going to show you a graph. It could be any text, it could be any visual, but this is going to be a graph. And you're going to have 30 seconds to make a personal connection. You're going to think to yourself, this reminds me of. Using that sentence frame, you could jot down some ideas or just keep them in the back of your mind. Then we're going to look at that same graph again, but this time I would like you to think about how it connects to something that you already know or something you've already learned. And then after that 45 seconds where you're making some connections, you're going to have a minute to share your ideas in the chat with other people. So to get us started, this is our text that we're going to look at. This is a response from a survey that was sent out to over 7,000 teachers across the country, asking them about remote learning. This was sent to both teachers and students. There's a link at the bottom here that you can click on and see the entire survey. But this is just one question that they asked teachers and their responses. So how would you describe the adjustment of the majority of your students? So take just 30 seconds to first just relate to this, reminds me of. And John is going to add this graph to the chat window in case you're like me and you're like squinting at this graph and trying to see all the numbers. He's going to send this to you so you don't have to do that. So 30 seconds, this reminds me of. Okay. Hopefully you've all had time to open up the graph and take a moment to look at it. Now you have 45 seconds to think about this graph and the information that it's telling us, and think about how it connects to something that you already know about teaching high school science. I'm going to give you about 45 seconds to think about that using the sentence frame. This is similar to my experience, and then be able to elaborate with because. So let me go back 45 seconds. Great. All right, so now everyone has 1 minute to put in the chat window their thoughts on this. This is similar to my experience because what is your connection that you're making to this graph, the information in this graph? So we don't know everybody in this classroom right now, and so I suggest just sending your ideas out to everybody versus trying to pick a partner. Oops. So in the chat, please respond to this, sharing your connection. Thank you, Jason. Yep, I start to seeing some responses. Thank you. Yes, Jason, I agree. This is especially important for incoming freshmen, thinking about how much they would have to adjust to perhaps entering high school in this difficult time, especially when no one knows what next year is going to look like. Thank you, Michael. I agree. Typical range for people that are new to any subject or any kind of new environment, right? Some people are quick to pick it up and other people need some more time to adjust. Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask maybe one or two people to elaborate on their response for us. Remember, if you don't want to be recorded, just go ahead and turn your video off. And you're also welcome to say that you'd like to pass and perhaps speak later. So Wilburn Eubanks, would you mind unmuting yourself and sharing a little bit more about what you wrote?
Well, I saw that the yellow was like the biggest as far as, let me see, how would you describe the adjustment? Yeah, a lot of kids are not really adjusting very well to like the remote learning, whether it's the resources or sometimes kids actually need to have that teacher in front of them to feel like they can understand the material versus being in front of a screen. And it's funny because students are in front of screens pretty much all day,
Yeah.
you know, from their phones or TV. But then when it comes to actually learning material, especially with science, it's like a, I don't know, it's like a third world for them. And that's what I find really funny and just interesting at the same time.
I agree, right? I completely agree with you. I found it very shocking the first time working with students in a remote environment that they're like, you're on your phone all the time. You're like, you know all these apps and things that I don't know yet. It is a leap for many students to think about, instead of using technology as a tool for socializing, to use it as a tool for learning.
Exactly.
So that's a great point. Yep. And let's ask one more person. Someone talked about labs that I thought was interesting. Can't find that comment now. Let's say, Jessica, would you mind elaborating a little bit more on what you wrote?
Sure. Just looking at the data, it just makes sense. Like with the new system, I'm thinking about all the needs that come in, not only for the students, but for the teachers learning the system. Thinking about the multi-level learners, thinking about tech issues that could have taken place. So to me, this data is like what I would expect to see at this juncture, where we're at for all parties involved.
Great, thank you. I agree, and I appreciate that you're pointing out it's not just, it's like multi-level learners, but it's also just like tech needs, it's a complete new system. Like it's just a lot to be able to process at once and to jump into. So thank you for all of your thoughts on that. So thinking about the classroom setting, and I did definitely appreciate thinking about the idea around technology and socializing, that we know in the classroom that peer-to-peer discussion plays a really important role. Students are using their peers and discussion to make sense of phenomenon, to be able to provide feedback to one another, to ask questions. I also think back to what someone said a moment ago, just about even their teacher, like the discussion with their teacher and making sure they're on the right track and having someone to ask questions to, that those are all the really important roles that we know that peer-to-peer discussion play in our regular classroom. And additionally, we know that the kids miss their friends, they miss their teachers, they miss socializing. And so finding a way to leverage peer-to-peer discussion in a remote environment, I think, is not only important in terms of learning science, but also keeping that connection that students would like to have with their peers and with their classmates. So throughout this webinar, I want us to try to just practice a couple of different ways that we can do that and think about how can we still use peer-to-peer discussion, but asynchronously. Yes, we know that live classroom is great. Not live, I mean synchronous classrooms like this are great, and they're a way to connect with students, but they're not always possible for all kids. We know that some students are having trouble with devices, with having internet, even teachers are. So we want to think about how can we keep all the great stuff about peer-to-peer discussion happening, even if it's asynchronous in our classrooms. So before we practice a few things as learners, I'm going to just give a little bit of background on this resource in case you haven't had an opportunity yet to open it up or look at all the different resources. Everything that I'm going to talk through, of course, is available on our remote website, remotenewvisions.org. All of our modules across all the disciplines are organized in a similar format. They all start with a launch, there's some work time built in, some check-in time built in, and then a wrap-up where students finish up a culminating assessment. And so this learning module is designed to for 1 to 3 weeks of instruction, depending on your learner needs. Just to give you an idea about that. Thank you, John, for sending out the plan. So this COVID-19, where did COVID-19 come from, is launched with a visual, a historical visual from a newspaper article in the 1980s around the emergence of HIV. So I know from our students' perspective, HIV and AIDS has been around their entire life, but from us, for our perspective, there was a time period when no one had heard of it. It was a novel disease, just like the novel coronavirus. And there was a lot of hysteria and misinformation around that disease as well. And so the launch just serves a purpose of surfacing student ideas, helping them realize that this has happened multiple times throughout history where we have this new disease or new pandemic that emerges, and starting to just get them thinking and asking questions. Then we go into the work time, where there's two assignments, 2 tasks that students work on during the work time. One is an investigation, where students look at graphs and some data and some visuals about zoonotic diseases that they surface, again, more ideas and thoughts about. And then they launch into looking at some texts and some videos and some visuals that help explain how viruses will jump from one organism to another. And they have a note taker where they do some, they annotate their text, and then they fill in some information in their note taker that responds to some of the questions that they had in the beginning of the unit. Then there's time for check-in. There's class comments, discussion boards. There's time for peer-to-peer discussion and using a student checklist for assessments, and time for the teacher to check in with the students to make sure they're on the right track before attempting their final wrap-up activity. So their wrap-up activity is Google Slides, where you're thinking about the sequence of events. And so the emergence of COVID-19, just like any zoonotic disease, has like a series of events that occurred for this to happen. And so students would use the Google Slides to put them in the correct order. That it's an open-ended question in some ways, so there's not just exactly one right order. And students also have an opportunity in some of the slides to choose and discuss and elaborate further about what's happening in that event. So just based on that very quick overview, I know that was super quick, and I know John shared the plan with you, and maybe you're opening it and kind of like looking at things for the first time. What are a few ideas that are just emerging from just that quick look around peer-to-peer discussion in this plan? So go ahead and answer in the chat to everybody. What are some places here that we see opportunities for peer discussion? Okay, I will give just a little bit more wait time if anybody would like to respond or not. It's okay. I think there we go. Great. All right. So we see places where we can get students involved and engaged. That's great. The start of the class, right? So perhaps in like the launch activities is when you're getting everyone surfacing their ideas and talking to each other. Great, Sintra, thank you. Yep, check in. Great. Okay. Great. All right, so let's launch into this. Thank you for your responses. Let's launch into this. And the first thing that we're going to practice is Flipgrid. Flipgrid is an app for peer-to-peer discussions where students have an opportunity to make little brief videos. They're about a minute long, and the students can view each other's videos and reply to each other's videos and make comments. And so for the Flipgrid, we have a Flipgrid set up for this webinar. And John is going to share this link in the chat as well as the password. This is also in your agenda. Thank you, John. There's also a QR code, so if you're quick, you can grab the Flipgrid link using your phone. Great. So in just a moment, we're going to send you into individual breakout rooms where you're going to have time to respond, to open up Flipgrid, respond to a question about COVID-19 yourself, and if you have enough time, to even respond to each other and to practice this. So I'm just going to go through the steps before we send you off into breakout rooms to work on this. The first thing is just make sure you have the code. And so don't worry, you don't actually have to write it down. I have that in the slide, but it's in the agenda, it's in the chat. And of course, if you send us a question, we can help you out. You're going to be in a breakout room alone for 5 minutes to work on Flipgrid yourself. Use this Flipgrid as if you're navigating the assignment yourself as a learner. And even if you haven't read through the plan, it's okay, just use your own background knowledge around the prompt. So for those of you that are new to Flipgrid, there's just a few steps to get in. So as soon as you click on the link, it's going to prompt you to enter the password. And then as soon as it might ask you to log into your email. If you've not already logged into your email, you can use a Gmail account or I believe a Microsoft account as well. And for your students, you have multiple ways of setting this up to protect security. And so this Flipgrid is more open because it's for adults and for educators. But when you're setting up your own, you can set it up to where only certain people can enter the Flipgrid or certain domains can enter the Flipgrid. So as soon as you're in, click on the big plus sign, green sign, and it's going to take you to the prompt. And you can listen to the question and then record your own response. You'll also be able to watch and record the response of others. So in just a second, John is going to send you off to your own breakout room to work on this. If you have any questions when you're in the breakout room by yourself, just message NVPS or me, and we'll come in and help you. I think we still have some people in breakout rooms, or what happened? Yeah.
They should be back momentarily.
Okay. Great. Yay, I see everybody's faces. You're back. All right, and so just a moment, we're going to debrief that activity. I think John was trying to help some people that were having trouble. It's okay if you weren't able to make the video. It was just meant for some time for you and space to play around with Flipgrid and see how it works and how you might use it. So it's okay if you didn't get all that done in 5 minutes. I did want to show you, this is what the admin view of class Flipgrid looks like. I have 2 grids. One was a test version that I was playing around with, and then one was the COVID-19 one that you guys were just interacting with. And it does show me at this time when I took the screenshot, there was no activity, but it lets me know just at a glance how many students have responded to the activity and how much time overall students have been on this grid. So let's go ahead and use the chat feature around your impressions of Flipgrid or how Flipgrid can be used to support peer-to-peer discussion. I know a few people had some technical issues and we're welcome to answer that, but just what are your ideas in terms of how to use it for peer-to-peer discussion? Mm-hmm. So this is a good question from Zuka about, is the video public? It's not public in the terms of, it's public. There was different settings that you can use for Flipgrid. And so if you're using this with your classroom, you can use the setting that only allows certain people to view it. I use the educator setting. So it was public. If you have the link, basically you could look at it. Right. Jessica, that's a really good point, that you need to make sure students are comfortable with the tool first, that there are some tutorials that you can use. You can just like watch a really quick video that shows you step by step how to do it. I see some tech problems. Natalie, you weren't able to share the video. But it is good that it allows you to control which posts that you can share. Great. Sintra, would you mind unmuting yourself and giving us a little bit more context from what you're saying, your comment? Sintra Bernardo, would you like to share a little more about your comment? Okay. Oh, okay, no worries. Nikita, would you mind sharing a little bit more about your comment?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
I use Flipgrid. I've used it for the last maybe 3 weeks. And I just noticed that the kids find it enjoyable and pleasurable to use, but they don't like to show their faces. So I'm trying to figure out how to get them into, it's okay, it's a safe space. You can share and not feel like someone's going to judge you. But I'm noticing that's one of my issues.
Yeah, what I like about it actually is it allows you, if the students want to, they can put like an emoji over their face, right? And so they don't actually have to show their face if they don't want to, if they don't feel comfortable with it. It allows them to kind of cover their face and still records their voice. I do know there's some other apps that we can maybe explore later where it's just voice. There's some voice recording ones instead of a video that might be useful for some students. Great. Jason, that's a great question. I'm not really sure about the functionality with cell phones. It's definitely something we can look into. Great. Great, great. Thank you so much for your ideas on Flipgrid. And again, I know that was really quick. It's just meant to introduce you to it and think about how it can be used in your classroom. We do want to look at one more way in which students can collaborate, whether it's synchronously or asynchronously, and collaborate and discuss with each other. And that is through using Google Slides. Okay, so again, we're going to move into breakout rooms to work on this activity, but this time you will be in a breakout room with other people. So before, the idea was just to separate you so you had some of your own quiet time. This time you are going to be in a group of about 4 people. And so what I'm going to ask that you do in your breakout room is to work on that final task. You have your own copy. Each group will have their own copy of the final Google slide deck. And when John in a few minutes assigns you to a breakout room, you're going to have a breakout room number. For example, group 1, group 2, group 3, etc. And so once you're in your breakout room with your group, you're going to click on the slide deck that is for your group, and you should have editing access. And so the first thing that you're going to do after you find your slide deck in your group is look through the slides and come to a consensus in your group. What is the sequence of events that led from COVID-19 starting as a completely novel disease in humans all the way to where we are now with this infection? And after you guys decide as a group what is the sequence of events, individually choose one of the slides. So almost all of the slides have some space where a student can elaborate their response and elaborate on their thinking. So as an individual, choose one of the slides that you would like to add a little bit of context to and use your own color. So it'd be nice if one person uses black, blue, yellow, green, etc. Yellow is not a good color, but you know what I mean, has a different color so that we know that each person in the group had an opportunity to contribute to the slide. And if you have time, which we may not, because we only have about 10 minutes for this, look at other people's slides and use a comment feature to comment on other people's ideas. So John is now adding all of the slide decks to the chat. These are also available in your agenda. So we're going to send you to your breakout room. Again, if anything comes up, you can chat me or John individually, and we can come in and help. That this is what the responses would look like from the teacher's point of view. that we had several people who were able to make a video and leave us videos, and you would be able to log in and respond to other people's videos. So, so with that, instead of using the chat feature, what I'd like to do now is just debrief what was it like to use slides to support peer-to-peer discussion. You can just unmute yourself, and if you have any comments, you can actually have a comment about Flipgrid or slides if you'd like. So you can just unmute yourself and talk to the group.
Hello. Working with the slides, it takes a little bit of practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily something like, all right, you can just get it off the first try, because sometimes, you know, when you're communicating with people, there might be like a little miscommunication.
Mm-hmm.
Working with the slides, sometimes they're like out of order. So like a group member could say, all right, I moved this slide over to this. So that was a bit confusing.
Mm-hmm.
But it just took like a little trial and error that where we can get the whole like process. Like I could see how students can get confused, but then I could see how with a little time, the
Mm-hmm.
students will be able to master it, and you know, with just a couple tries. But it was okay though. I've
Mm-hmm.
never seen that feature, but like I've never used that feature before, but it worked so far.
Great, and that activity is flexible in the sense that you could have students do that and complete activity individually, and then share slide decks with a partner who has commenting access. So really across any of the Google Documents, slides, etc., students can collaboratively work on things just after the fact using comments as well. One last comment before we wrap up. Does anyone have anything else they noticed?
So I mean, I had a question. What were we supposed to be writing in the text boxes? Were we supposed to be talking to our classmates, or were we supposed to be taking text from the links and putting it there?
Yeah, so that would have been a culminating assessment. So I know that was probably a little challenging if you hadn't had time yet to like look through everything. But in that case, it would have been students explaining that slide using their learning. So as a culminating assessment, what does it mean that it's carried by bats, that there's information in the text and in the videos that students would have pulled from and would have explained that piece.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Of course. All right. And with that, we are almost at time. I just want to mention that on the remote learning website, there's going to be updates and new resources. There's going to be a new resource in about a week and a half, and we will have new webinars as well through the support calendar coming up. And one quick plug for HR, the New Visions is hiring for our charter network and at our organization. So if anyone is looking for a new position or has a friend or family member looking for a position, New Visions is hiring. And please take a moment for filling in our feedback form. So John's going to put that in the chat feature for us, and it's also in your agenda. And I just want to thank you for joining us. I know that the tech issues kind of took away from some of our time where we got to collaborate with each other. So I'm sorry about that, but please join us for our next webinar that's coming up, and hope to see you soon.